Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andrea Mackenzie from Toronto, and today we're going to be having the pleasure of listening to live readings from Ella Montgomery's works. Now, you may be wondering why I chose the theme Tea and Company for this month. It's because I grew up in the Snow Belt. January is traditionally the very worst month, and I'm fairly certain that other people who are online right now are experiencing the same bone-chilling cold. And if you're not in the middle of a snowstorm, then there is one threatened. Am I right? So, Tea and Company has always seemed to me to be one of the greatest pleasures at this time of year. I am delighted to see everyone gathered here. We have two, possibly three readings today. The ones I have chosen are comedic because if there are gray skies and we can't go outside, it's always a pleasure to laugh. If everyone but the readers could ensure that their microphones, hi Beth, great to see you. If everyone could ensure that their microphones are off, except for the readers, when we begin, that would be much appreciated. So, our first readers today are Mary-Eve Goyette-Smith, well known to the Readathon as one of our steadfast readers, and Sarah Goff, who has always been a foundational member and who helped write the questions for many of the books for the Readathon. Mary-Eve, how would you like to introduce yourself to us?
Well, I've lived in Hamilton pretty much my whole life, Hamilton, Ontario. I've loved all things Montgomery since I was 10 years old, and as I always say, Mrs. Wigg read Anne of Green Gables to our 5th grade classroom, and this book is actually I got for my 10th Christmas because
Wow.
I was, so it's very precious, and it's the very same edition that Mrs. Wigg read because I had her bring it. I've been reunited with her, and she brought the book she actually read to us one time, and it was identical to this one. So Tea and Company are two of my favorite things. So I'm really happy to participate in this. If I do freeze up, Andrea, you could tell me, and I'll turn my camera off. But let's hope for the best. Okay.
Thank you, Mary-Eve. Sarah, go ahead, please.
Yep, I'm Sarah Goff. I live in upstate New York. I lived in the city for many, many years, which is when I first found the Kindred Spirits list, which is really what sort of opened up all of the Montgomery books to me. I was familiar with Anne, but I didn't realize there were so many others until I found that list back in, I think it was 1995. And I also had one of my first trepidatious meetings with people from that list in Northern California, and my parents thought I was absolutely insane to meet someone off the internet. So I am excited to be here, and I really enjoyed the readings in December. They were lovely, and I hope you all enjoy this reading today.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I would like to point out, by the way, that Sarah and I met at a conference, a Montgomery conference in PEI, and was it 2000 or 2002?
Oh, I'm not sure.
I think it was 2002. It was a long time ago. Okay, so without further ado, Mary-Eve, would you please announce the chapter and we will begin the readings.
Okay, my pleasure. Chapter 16, Diana is invited to tea with tragic results. October was a beautiful month at Green Gables, when the birches in the hollow turned as golden as sunshine, and the maples behind the orchard were royal crimson, and the wild cherry trees along the lane put on the loveliest shades of dark red and bronzy green, while the fields sunned themselves in aftermaths. Anne reveled in the world of color about her. "Oh, Marilla," she exclaimed one Saturday morning, coming dancing in with her arms full of gorgeous boughs. "I'm so glad I live in a world where there are Octobers. It would be terrible if we just skipped from September to November, wouldn't it? Look at these maple branches. Don't they give you a thrill? Several thrills? I'm going to decorate my room with them." "Messy things," said Marilla, whose aesthetic sense was not noticeably developed. You clutter up your room entirely too much with out-of-doors stuff, Anne. Bedrooms were made to sleep in. Oh, and dream in too, Marilla. And you know one can dream so much better in a room where there are pretty things. I'm going to put these boughs in the old blue jug and set them on my table. Mind you don't drop leaves all over the stairs then. I'm going to a meeting of the AIDS Society at Carmody this afternoon, Anne, and I won't likely be home before dark. You'll have to get Matthew and Jerry their supper, so mind you don't forget to put the tea to draw until you sit down at the table as you did last time. It was dreadful of me to forget, said Anne apologetically, but that was the afternoon I was trying to think of a name for Violet Vale, and it crowded other things out. Matthew was so good. He never scolded a bit. He put the tea down himself and said we could wait a while as well as not. And I told him a lovely fairy story while we were waiting, so he didn't find the time long at all. It was a beautiful fairy story, Marilla. I forgot the end of it, so I made up an end for it myself, and Matthew said he couldn't tell where the join came in. Matthew would think it all right, Anne, if you took a notion to get up and have dinner in the middle of the night. But you keep your wits about you this time. And I don't really know if I'm doing right. It may make you more addle-pated than ever, but you can ask Diana to come over and spend the afternoon with you and have tea here. Oh, Marilla! Anne clasped her hands. How perfectly lovely. You are able to imagine things after all, or else you'd never have understood how I've longed for that very thing. It will seem so nice and grown-uppish. No fear of my forgetting to put the tea to draw when I have company. Oh, Marilla, can I use the rosebud spray tea set? No, indeed. The rosebud tea set. Well, what next? You know I never use that except for the minister or the aides. You'll put down the old brown tea set. But you can open the little crock of cherry preserves. It's time it was being used anyhow. I believe it's beginning to work. And you can cut some fruit cake and have some of the cookies and snaps. I can just imagine myself sitting down at the head of the table and pouring out the tea, said Anne, shutting her eyes ecstatically, and asking Diana if she takes sugar. I know she doesn't, but of course I'll ask her just as if I didn't know, and then pressing her to take another piece of fruit cake and another helping of preserves. Oh, Marilla, it's a wonderful sensation just to think of it. Can I take her into the spare room to lay off her hat when she comes, and then into the parlor to sit? No, the sitting room will do for you and your company. But there's a bottle half full of raspberry cordial that was left over from the church social the other night. It's on the second shelf of the sitting room closet, and you and Diana can have it, if you like, and a cookie to eat with it along in the afternoon, for I dare say Matthew will be late coming in to tea, since he's hauling potatoes to the vessel. Anne flew down to the hollow, past the Dryad's Bubble, and up the spruce path to Orchard Slope to ask Diana to tea. As a result, just after Marilla had driven off to Carmody, Diana came over, dressed in her second-best dress and looking exactly as it is proper to look when asked out for tea. At other times she was wont to run into the kitchen without knocking, but now she knocked primly at the front door. And when Anne, dressed in her second best, as this unnatural solemnity lasted until after Diana had been taken to the east gable to lay off her hat, and then had sat for 10 minutes in the sitting room, toes in position. How is your mother? Inquired Anne politely, just as if she had not seen Mrs. Barry picking apples that morning in excellent health and spirits. She is very well, thank you. I suppose Mr. Cuthbert is hauling potatoes to the Lily Sands this afternoon, is he? Said Diana, who had ridden down to Mr. Harmon Andrews that morning in Matthew's cart. Yes, our potato crop is very good this year. I hope your father's potato crop is good too. It is fairly good, thank you. Have you picked many of your apples yet? Oh, ever so many, said Anne, forgetting to be dignified and jumping up quickly. Let's go out to the orchard and get some of the red sweetings, Diana. Marilla says we can have all that are left on the tree. Marilla is a very generous woman. She said we could have fruit cake and cherry preserves for tea, But it isn't good manners to tell your company what you're going to give them to eat, so I won't tell you what she said we could have to drink. Only it begins with an R and a C, and it's bright red color. I love bright red drinks, don't you? They taste twice as good as any other color. The orchard, with its great sweeping boughs that bent to the ground with fruit, proved so delightful that the little girls spent most of the afternoon in it, sitting in a grassy corner where the frost had spared the green, and the mellow autumn sunshine lingered warmly, eating apples and talking as hard as they could. Diana had much to tell Anne of what went on in school. She had to sit with Gertie Pye, and she hated it. Gertie squeaked her pencil all the time, and it just made her, Diana's, blood run cold. Ruby Gillis had charmed all her warts away, true's you live, with a magic pebble that old Mary Joe from the creek gave her. You had to rub the warts with the pebble and then throw it away over your left shoulder at the time of the new moon, and the warts would all go. Charlie Sloane's name was written up with M. White's on the porch wall, and M. White was awful mad about it. Sam Bolter had sassed Mr. Phillips in class, and Mr. Phillips whipped him, and Sam's father came down to the school and dared Mr. Phillips to lay a hand on one of his children again. And Mattie Andrews had a new red hood and a blue crossover with tassels on it, and the airs she put on about it were perfectly sickening. And Lizzie Wright didn't speak to Mamie Wilson because Mamie Wilson's grown-up sister had cut out Lizzie Wright's grown-up sister with her bow, and everybody missed Anne so and wished she'd come to school again. And Gilbert Blythe, but Anne didn't want to hear about Gilbert Blythe. She jumped up hurriedly and said, "Suppose they go in and have some raspberry cordial." Anne looked on the second shelf of the room pantry, but there was no bottle of raspberry cordial there. Search revealed it away back on the top shelf. Anne put it on the tray and set it on the table with a tumbler. "Now, please, help yourself, Diana," she said politely. "I don't believe I'll have any just now. I don't feel as if I wanted any after all those apples." Diana poured herself out a tumblerful, looked at its bright red hue admiringly, and then sipped it daintily. "That's awfully nice raspberry cordial, Anne," she said. "I didn't know raspberry cordial was so nice." "I'm real glad you like it. Take as much as you want. I'm going to run out and stir the fire up. There are so many responsibilities on a person's mind when they're keeping house, isn't there?" When Anne came back from the kitchen, Diana was drinking her second glassful of cordial, and being entreated thereto by Anne, she offered no particular objection to the drinking of a third. The tumblerfuls were generous ones, and the raspberry cordial was certainly very nice. "The nicest I ever drank," said Diana. "It's ever so much nicer than Mrs. Lynde's, although she brags of hers so much. It doesn't taste a bit like hers." "I should think Marilla's raspberry cordial would probably be much nicer than Mrs. Lynde's," said Anne loyally. "Marilla is a famous cook. She is trying to teach me to cook, but I assure you, Diana, it is uphill work. There's so little scope for imagination in cookery. You just have to go by rules. The last time I made a cake, I forgot to put the flour in. I was thinking the loveliest story about you and me. Diana, I thought you were desperately ill with smallpox, and everybody deserted you. But I went boldly to your bedside and nursed you back to life. And then I took the smallpox and died, and I was buried under those poplar trees in the graveyard, and you planted a rose bush by my grave and watered it with your tears. And you never, never forgot the friend of your youth who sacrificed her life for you. Oh, it was such a pathetic tale, Diana. The tears just rained down over my cheeks while I mixed the cake. But I forgot the flour, and the cake was a dismal failure. Flour is so essential to cakes, you know. Marilla was very cross, and I don't wonder. I'm a great trial to her. She was terribly mortified about the pudding sauce last week. We had a plum pudding for dinner on Tuesday, and there was half the pudding and a pitcher full of sauce left over. Marilla said there was enough for another dinner and told me to set it on the pantry shelf and cover it. I meant to cover it just as much as could be, Diana, but when I carried it in, I was imagining I was a nun. Of course, I'm a Protestant, but I imagined I was a Catholic, taking the veil to bury a broken heart in cloistered seclusion, and I forgot all about covering the pudding sauce. I thought of it next morning and ran to the pantry. Diana, fancy if you can my extreme horror at finding a mouse drowned in that pudding sauce. I lifted the mouse out with a spoon and threw it out in the yard, and then I washed the spoon in 3 waters. Marilla was out milking, and I fully intended to ask her when she came in if I'd give the sauce to the pigs. But when she did come in, I was imagining that I was a frost fairy going through the woods, turning the trees red and yellow, whichever they wanted to be. So I never thought about the pudding sauce again, and Marilla sent me out to pick apples. Well, Mr. and Mrs. Chester Ross from Spencerville came here that morning. You know they are very stylish people, especially Mrs. Chester Ross. When Marilla called me in, dinner was all ready and everybody was at the table. I tried to be as polite and dignified as I could be, for I wanted Mrs. Chester Ross to think I was a ladylike little girl, even if I wasn't pretty. Everything went right until I saw Marilla coming in with the plum pudding in one hand and the pitcher of pudding sauce warmed up in the other. Diana, that was a terrible moment. I remembered everything, and I just stood up in my place and shrieked out, Marilla, you mustn't use that pudding sauce. There was a mouse drowned in it. I forgot to tell you before. Oh, Diana, I shall never forget that awful moment if I live to be 100. Mrs. Chester Ross just looked at me, and I thought I would sink through the floor with mortification. She is such a perfect housekeeper, and fancy what she must have thought of us. Marilla turned red as fire, but she never said a word then. She just carried that sauce and pudding out and brought in some strawberry preserves. She even offered me some, but I couldn't swallow a mouthful. It was like heaping coals of fire on my head. After Mrs. Chester Ross went away, Marilla gave me a dreadful scolding. Why, Diana, what is the matter?
Diana had stood up very unsteadily. Then she sat down again, putting her hands to her head. I'm awful sick, she said a little thickly. I must go right home. Oh, you mustn't dream of going home without your tea, cried Anne in distress. I'll get it right off. I'll go and put the tea down this very minute. I must go home, repeated Diana, stupidly but determinedly. Let me get you a lunch anyhow, implored Anne. Let me give you a bit of fruitcake and some of the cherry preserves. Lie down on the sofa for a little while and you'll be better. Where do you feel bad? I must go home, said Diana, and that was all she would say. In vain, Anne pleaded. I never heard of company going home without tea, she mourned. Oh, Diana, do you suppose it's possible you're really taking the smallpox? If you are, I'll go and nurse you. You can depend on that. I'll never forsake you. But I do wish you'd stay till after tea. Where do you feel bad? I'm awful dizzy, said Diana. And indeed, she walked very dizzily. Anne, with tears of disappointment in her eyes, got Diana's hat and went with her as far as the Barry yard fence. Then she wept all the way back to Green Gables, where she sorrowfully put the remainder of the raspberry cordial back into the pantry and got tea ready for Matthew and Jerry, with all the zest gone out of the performance. The next day was Sunday, and as the rain poured down in torrents until dusk, Anne did not stir abroad from Green Gables. Monday afternoon, Marilla sent her down to Mrs. Lynde's on an errand. In a very short space of time, Anne came flying back up the lane, with tears rolling down her cheeks. Into the kitchen she dashed and flung herself face downward on the sofa in agony. Whatever has gone wrong now, Anne? Queried Marilla in doubt and dismay. I do hope you haven't gone and been saucy to Mrs. Lynde again. No answer from Anne, save more tears and stormier sobs. Anne Shirley, when I ask you a question, I want to be answered. Sit up right this very minute and tell me what you are crying about. Anne sat up, tragedy personified. Mrs. Lynde was up to see Mrs. Barry today, and Mrs. Barry was in an awful state, she wailed. She says that I set Diana drunk Saturday and sent her home in disgraceful condition. And she says I must be a thoroughly bad, wicked little girl, and she's never going to let Diana play with me again. Oh, Marilla, I'm just overcome with woe. Marilla stared in blank amazement. Set Diana drunk, she said when she found her voice. Anne, are you or Mrs. Barry crazy? What on earth did you give her? Not a thing but raspberry cordial, sobbed Anne. I never thought raspberry cordial would set people drunk, Marilla. Not even if they drank 3 big tumblerfuls as Diana did. Oh, it sounds so like Mrs. Thomas's husband. But I didn't mean to set her drunk. Drunk fiddlesticks, said Marilla, marching to the sitting room pantry. There on the shelf was a bottle, which she at once recognized as one containing some of her 3-year-old homemade currant wine, for which she was celebrated in Avonlea, although certain of the stricter sort, Mrs. Barry among them, disapproved strongly of it. And at the same time, Marilla recollected she had put the bottle of raspberry cordial down in the cellar instead of in the pantry, as she had told Anne. She went back to the kitchen with the wine bottle in her hand. Her face was twitching in spite of herself. Anne, you certainly have a genius for getting into trouble. You went and gave Diana currant wine instead of raspberry cordial. Didn't you know the difference yourself? I never tasted it, said Anne. I thought it was the cordial. I meant to be so hospitable. Diana got awfully sick and had to go home. Mrs. Barry told Mrs. Lynde she was simply dead drunk. She just laughed silly-like when her mother asked what was the matter and went to sleep and slept for hours. Her mother smelled her breath and knew she was drunk. She had a fearful headache all day yesterday. Mrs. Barry is so indignant. She will never believe what I did it on purpose. I should think she would better punish Diana for being so greedy as to drink 3 glassfuls of anything, said Marilla shortly. Why, 3 of those big glasses would have made her sick even if it only had been cordial. Well, this story will be a nice handle for those folks who are down on me for making currant wine, although I haven't made any for 3 years since I found out the minister didn't approve. I just kept that bottle for sickness. There, child, don't cry. I can't see as you were to blame, although I'm sorry it happened so. I must cry, said Anne. My heart is broken. The stars in their courses fight against me, Marilla. Diana and I are parted forever. Oh, Marilla, I little dreamed of this when we first swore our vows of friendship. Don't be foolish, Anne. Mrs. Barry will think better of it when she finds you're not really to blame. I suppose she thinks you've done it for a silly joke or something of that sort. You best go up this evening and tell her how it was. My courage fails me at the thought of facing Diana's injured mother, sighed Anne. I wish you'd go, Marilla. You're so much more dignified than I am. Likely she'd listen to you quicker than to me. Well, I will, said Marilla, reflecting that it would probably be the wiser course. Don't cry any more, Anne. It will be all right. Marilla had changed her mind about it being all right by the time she got back from Orchard Slope. Anne was watching for her coming and flew to the porch door to meet her. Oh, Marilla, I know by your face that it's been no use, she said sorrowfully. Mrs. Barry won't forgive me? Mrs. Barry, indeed, snapped Marilla. Of all the unreasonable women I ever saw, she's the worst. I told her it was all a mistake and you weren't to blame, and she just simply didn't believe me. And she rubbed it in well about my currant wine and how I'd always said it couldn't have the least effect on anybody. I just told her plainly that currant wine wasn't meant to be drunk 3 tumblerfuls at a time, and that if I had a child to do with so greedy, I'd sober her up with a right good spanking. Marilla whisked into the kitchen, grievously disturbed, leaving a very much distracted little soul in the porch behind her. Presently, Anne stepped out bareheaded into the chill autumn dusk. Very determinedly and steadily, she took her way down through the sere clover field, over the log bridge and up through the spruce grove, lighted by a pale little moon hanging low over the western woods. Mrs. Barry, coming to the door in answer to a timid knock, found a white-lipped, eager-eyed suppliant on the doorstep. Her face hardened. Mrs. Barry was a woman of strong prejudices and dislikes, and her anger was of the cold, sullen sort which is always hardest to overcome. To do her justice, she really believed Anne had made Diana drunk out of sheer malice prepense, and she was honestly anxious to preserve her little daughter from the contamination of further intimacy with such a child. What do you want? She said stiffly. Anne clasped her hands. Oh, Mrs. Barry, please forgive me. I did not mean to intoxicate Diana. How could I? Just imagine if you were a poor little orphan girl that kind people had adopted, and you had just one bosom friend in all the world. Do you think you would intoxicate her on purpose? I thought it was only raspberry cordial. I was firmly convinced it was raspberry cordial. Oh, please don't say that you won't let Diana play with me anymore. If you do, you will cover my life with a dark cloud of woe. This speech, which would have softened good Mrs. Lynde's heart in a twinkling, had no effect on Mrs. Barry except to irritate her still more. She was suspicious of Anne's big words and dramatic gestures, and imagined that the child was making fun of her. So she said coldly and cruelly, "I don't think that you are a fit little girl for Diana to associate with. You better go home and behave yourself." Anne's lip quivered. "Won't you let me see Diana just once to say farewell?" she implored. "Diana has gone over to Carmody with her father," said Mrs. Barry, going in and shutting the door. Anne went back to Green Gables, calm with despair. "My last hope is gone," she told Marilla. "I went up and saw Mrs. Barry myself, and she treated me very insultingly. Marilla, I do not think she is a well-bred woman. There is nothing more to do except pray, and I haven't much hope that'll do much good, because, Marilla, I do not believe that God himself can do very much with such an obstinate person as Mrs. Barry." "Anne, you shouldn't say such things," rebuked Marilla, striving to overcome that unholy tendency to laughter, which she was dismayed to find growing upon her. And indeed, when she told the whole story to Matthew that night, she did laugh heartily over Anne's tribulations. But when she slipped into the east gable before going to bed and found that Anne had cried herself to sleep, an unaccustomed softness crept into her face. "Poor little soul," she murmured, lifting a loose curl of hair from the child's tear-stained face. Then she bent down and kissed the flushed cheek on the pillow.
Yay, Mary Ebb, please come back on camera so you can see how we appreciated your reading. Yay, thank you so much. That was superb. And of course, we know that Anne went to the rescue and saved Diana's little sister's life. And so they become friends once again. And Mrs. Barry gives tea with 3 different kinds of cake on the best china. So thank you very much, Mary Ebb and Sarah. Now, the next reading I chose because it's about company, although it isn't strictly speaking tea, but it is also one of the funniest chapters that I have found in Ella Montgomery. And I am so pleased that 2 of our delightful members will be reading this chapter, and that is Allison Hudson and Caroline Jones. Allison, Caroline, if you would like to introduce yourselves now, please.
Hi, everybody. I am an Albertan living in Ireland. That's a long story. I'm currently the visiting scholar at the Montgomery Institute. Having been a lifelong Montgomery fan, I found myself falling into the academic side of things, but still, this is just as good. And it's after 7 p.m. here, so I'm drinking raspberry cordial in honor of the last chapter. Yeah, go ahead, Caroline.
I am Caroline Jones. I am the past visiting scholar. And Allison and I are co-planning the conference. She's doing most of the work. I'm just... We are a good team. We are a good team. I'm in Texas, where we're having unprecedented cold right now. It's probably close to freezing in Austin, where I am, right in the middle of the state, but it's just getting colder. And I'm very excited to be here. We're reading one of my favorite chapters.
Excellent. Thank you both. And without further ado, please go ahead, announce your chapter, and we will listen with pleasure.
We are reading Emily Climb's chapter 17. I hope this is the right one, Andrea, where Perry goes a visiting. So welcome back to 1983. Hopefully it's close enough to the right version. So I'm reading the first half of If a Body, Kiss a Body. It was 10:30, and Emily realized with a sigh that she must go to bed. When she'd come in at 9:30 from Alice Kennedy's thimble party, she'd asked permission of Aunt Ruth to sit up an hour later to do some special studying. Aunt Ruth had consented reluctantly and suspiciously and had gone to bed herself, with sundry warnings regarding candles and matches. Emily had studied diligently for 45 minutes and written poetry for 15. The poem burned for completion, but Emily resolutely pushed her portfolio away. At that moment, she remembered that she had left her Jimmy book in her school bag in the dining room. This would never do. Aunt Ruth would be down before her in the morning and would inevitably examine the book bag, find the Jimmy book, and read it. There were things in that Jimmy book it was well Aunt Ruth should not see. She must slip down and bring it up. Very quietly, she opened her door and tiptoed downstairs in anguish at every creaking step. Aunt Ruth, who slept in the big front bedroom at the other end of the hall, would surely hear those creaks. They were enough to waken the dead. They did not waken Aunt Ruth, however, and Emily reached the dining room, found her book bag, and was just going to return when she happened to glance at the mantelpiece. There, propped up against the clock, was a letter for her, which had evidently come by the evening mail. A nice, thin letter with the address of a magazine in the corner. Emily set her candle on the table, tore open the letter, found the acceptance of a poem and a check for $3. Acceptances, especially acceptances with checks, were still such rare occurrences with our Emily that they always made her a little crazy. She forgot Aunt Ruth. She forgot that it was nearing 11 o'clock. She stood there entranced, reading over and over the brief editorial note. Brief, but oh, how sweet. Your charming poem. We would like to see more of your work. Oh, yes, indeed, they should see more of it. Emily turned with a start. Was that a tap at the door? No, at the window. Who? What? The next moment she was aware that Perry was standing on the side veranda, grinning at her through the window. She was at it in a flash, and without pausing to think, still in the exhilaration of her acceptance, she slipped the catch and pushed the window up. She knew where Perry had been and was dying to know how he'd got along. He'd been invited to dinner with Dr. Hardy in the fine Queen Street house. This was considered a great honor, and very few students ever received it. Perry owed the invitation to his brilliant speech at the interschool debate. Dr. Hardy had heard it and decided that here was a coming man. Perry had been enormously proud of the invitation and had bragged of it to Teddy and Emily, not to Ilse, who had not yet forgiven him for his tactlessness the night of the debate. Emily had been pleased, but had warned Perry that he would need to watch his step at Dr. Hardy's. She felt some qualms in regard to his etiquette, but Perry felt none. He would be all right, he loftily declared. Perry perched himself on the windowsill, and Emily sat down on the corner of the sofa, reminding herself that it could only be for a minute. Saw the light in the window as I went past, said Perry, so I thought I'd just sneak around to the side and see if it was you. Wanted to tell you the tale while it was fresh. Say, Emily, you were right. R-I-G-H-T. I should smile. I wouldn't go through this evening again for $100. How did you get along? Asked Emily anxiously. In a sense, she felt responsible for Perry's manners. Such as he'd acquired at New Moon. Perry grinned. It's a heart-rending tale. I've had a lot of conceit taken out of me. I suppose you'll say that's a good thing. You could spare some, said Emily coolly. Perry shrugged his shoulders. Well, I'll tell you all about it if you won't tell Ilse or Teddy. I'm not going to have them laughing at me. I went to Queen Street at the proper time. I remembered all you'd said about boots and tie and nails and handkerchief, and I was all right outside. When I got to the house, my troubles began. It was so big and splendid, I felt queer, not afraid. I wasn't afraid then, but just a bit as if I was ready to jump like a strange cat when you try to pat it. I rang the bell. Of course, it stuck and kept on ringing like mad. I could hear it away down the hall, and thinks I, they'll think I don't know any better than to keep on ringing it till somebody comes. And that rattled me. The maid rattled me still more. I didn't know whether... Oh, Perry. Well, I didn't. I never was to a house where there was a maid like that before, all dolled up with a cap and finicky little apron. She made me feel like 30 cents. Did you shake hands with her? No. Emily gave a sigh of relief. She held the door open and I went in. I didn't know what to do then. Guess I'd have stood there till I took root, only Dr. Hardy himself came through the hall. He shook hands and showed me where to put my hat and coat, and then he took me into the parlor to meet his wife. The floor was as slippery as ice, and just as I stepped on the rug inside the parlor door, it went clean from under me, and down I went and slid across the floor, feet foremost, right to Mrs. Hardy. I was on my back, not on my stomach, or it would have been quite the proper Oriental caper, wouldn't it? Emily couldn't laugh. Oh, Perry. Great snakes, Emily, it wasn't my fault. All the etiquette in the world couldn't have prevented it. Of course, I felt like a fool. But I got up and laughed. No one else laughed. They were all decent. Mrs. Hardy was smooth as wax, Hoped I hadn't hurt myself. And Dr. Hardy said he had slipped the same way more than once after they'd given up their good old carpets and taken to rugs and hardwood. I was scared to move, so I sat down in the nearest chair, and there was a dog on it, Mrs. Hardy's Peak. Oh, I didn't kill it. I got the worst scare of the two. By the time I had made port in another chair, the perspiration was just pouring down my face. Some more folks arrived just then, so that kind of took the edge off me, and I had time to get my bearings. I found I had about 10 pairs of hands and feet, and my boots were too big and coarse. Then I found myself with my hands in my pockets, whistling. Emily began to say, "Oh, Perry," but bit it off and swallowed it. What was the use of saying anything? I knew that wasn't proper, so I stopped and took my hands out and began to bite my nails. Finally, I put my hands underneath me and sat on them. I doubled my feet back under my chair and I sat like that till we went out to dinner. Sat like that when a fat old lady waddled in and all the other fellows stood up. I didn't see any reason for it. There was plenty of chairs. But later on, it occurred to me that it was some etiquette stunt and I ought to have got up too. Should I? Of course, said Emily wearily. Don't you remember how Ilse used to rag you about that very thing? Oh, I'd forgotten. Ilse was always jawing about something. But live and learn, I won't forget again, you bet. There were 3 or 4 other boys there, and the new French teacher, and a couple of bankers, and some ladies. I got out to dinner without falling over the floor and got into a chair between Miss Hardy and the aforesaid old lady. I gave one look over that table, and then, Emily, I knew what it was to be afraid at last, all right. I never knew it before, honest. I used to think you carried fierce style. Sorry, I was in a regular funk. I used to think you carried fierce style at New Moon when you had company, but I never saw anything like that table, and everything so dazzling and glittering, and enough forks and spoons and things at one place to fit everybody out. There was a piece of bread folded in my napkin, and it fell out and went skating over the floor. I could feel myself turning red all over my face and neck. I suppose you call it blushing. I never blushed before that I remember. I didn't know whether I ought to get up and go and pick it up or not. Then the maid brought me another one. I used the wrong spoon to eat my soup with, but I tried to remember what your Aunt Laura said about the proper way to eat soup. I'd get on all right for a few spoonfuls, then I'd get interested in something somebody was saying and go gulp.
Did you tilt your plate to get the last spoonful? Asked Emily despairingly. No, I was just going to when I remembered it wasn't proper. I hate to lost it too. It was awful good soup, and I was hungry. The good old dowagger next to me did. I got on pretty well with the meat and vegetables except once. I'd packed a load of meat and potatoes on my fork, and just as I lifted it, I saw Mrs. Hardy eyeing it, and I remembered I oughtn't to have loaded up my fork like that. And I jumped, and it all fell off in my napkin. I didn't know whether it would be etiquette to scrape it up and put it back on my plate, so I left it there. Pudding was all right, only I ate it with a spoon, my soup spoon, and everyone else ate theirs with a fork. But it tasted just as good one way as another, and I was getting reckless. You always use spoons at New Moon to eat pudding. Why didn't you watch what the others did and imitate them? Too rattled, but I'll say this. For all this style, the eats weren't a bit better than you have at New Moon. No, nor as good by a jugful. Your Aunt Elizabeth's cooking would knock the spots off the Hardys every time, and they didn't give you too much of anything. After the dinner was over, we went back to the parlor. They called it the living room, and things weren't so bad. I didn't do anything out of the way except knock over a bookcase. Perry. Well, it was wobbly. I was leaning against it talking to Mr. Hardy, and I suppose I leaned too hard, for the blooming thing went over. But writing it and getting the books back seemed to loosen me up, and I wasn't so tongue-tied after that. I got on not too bad, only every once in a long while, I'd let slip a bit of slang before I could catch it. I tell you, I wished I'd taken your advice about talking slang. Once, the fat old lady agreed with something I'd said. She had sense if she did have 3 chins, and I was so tickled to find her on my side that I got excited and said to her, "You bet your boots," before I thought. And I guess I bragged a bit. Do I brag too much, Emily? This question had never presented itself to Perry before. You do, said Emily candidly, and it's very bad form. Well, I felt kind of cheap after I'd done it. I guess I've got an awful lot to learn yet, Emily. I'm going to buy a book on etiquette and learn it off by heart. No more evenings like this for me. But it was better at the last. Jim Hardy took me off to the den and we played checkers and I licked him dizzy. Nothing wrong with my checker etiquette, I tell you. And Mrs. Hardy said my speech at the debate was the best she had ever heard for a boy of my age, and she wanted to know what I meant to go in for. She's a great little dame and has the social end of things down fine. That is one reason I want you to marry me when the time comes, Emily. I've got to have a wife with brains. Don't talk nonsense, Perry, said Emily haughtily. "'Tisn't nonsense," said Perry stubbornly, "and it's time we settled something. You needn't turn up your nose at me because you're a Murray. I'll be worth marrying some day, even for a Murray. Come, put me out of my misery." Emily rose disdainfully. She had her dreams, as all girls have, the rose-red one of love among them, but Perry Miller had no share in those dreams. "I'm not a Murray, and I'm going upstairs. Good night." "Wait half a second," said Perry with a grin. "When the clock strikes 11, I'm going to kiss you." Emily did not for a moment believe that Perry had the slightest notion of doing anything of the kind, which was foolish of her, for Perry had a habit of always doing what he said he was going to do. But then he'd never been sentimental. She ignored his remark, but lingered a moment to ask another question about the Hardy dinner. Perry did not answer the question. The clock began to strike 11 as she asked it. He flung his legs over the windowsill and stepped into the room. Emily realized, too late, that he meant what he said. She had only time to duck her head, and Perry's hearty, energetic smack, there was nothing subtle about Perry's kisses, fell on her ear instead of her cheek. At the very moment Perry kissed her, and before her indignant protest could rush to her lips, two things happened. A gust of wind swept in from the veranda and blew the little candle out, and the dining room door opened, and Aunt Ruth appeared in the doorway, robed in a pink flannel nightgown and carrying another candle, the light of which struck upward with gruesome effect on her set face with its halo of crimping pins. This is one of the places where a conscientious biographer feels that, in the good old phrase, her pen cannot do justice to the scene. Emily and Perry stood as if turned to stone. So for a moment did Aunt Ruth. Aunt Ruth had expected to find Emily there, writing, as she had done one night a month previously when Emily had had an inspiration at bedtime, and had slipped down to the warm dining room to jot it in a jimmy book. But this, I must admit, it did look bad. Really, I think we can hardly blame Aunt Ruth for righteous indignation. Aunt Ruth looked at the unlucky pair. "What are you doing here?" she asked Perry. Stovepipe Town made a mistake. "Oh, looking for a round square," said Perry offhandedly, his eyes suddenly becoming limpid with mischief and lawless roguery. Perry's impudence, Aunt Ruth called it that, and really I think he was impudent, naturally made a bad matter worse. Aunt Ruth turned to Emily. "Perhaps you can explain how you came to be here at this hour kissing this fellow in the dark?" Emily flinched from the crude vulgarity of the question as if Aunt Ruth had struck her. She forgot how much appearances justified Aunt Ruth and let a perverse spirit enter into and possess her. She lifted her head haughtily. "I have no explanation to give to such a question, Aunt Ruth." "I didn't think you would have." Aunt Ruth gave a very disagreeable laugh, through which a thin, discordant note of triumph sounded. One might have thought that, under all her anger, something pleased Aunt Ruth. It is pleasant to be justified in the opinion we have always entertained of anybody. "Well, perhaps you will be so good as to answer some questions. How did this fellow get here?" "Window," said Perry laconically, seeing that Emily was not going to answer. "I was not asking you, sir. Go," said Aunt Ruth, pointing dramatically to the window. "I'm not going to stir a step out of this room until I see what you're going to do to Emily," said Perry stubbornly. "I," said Aunt Ruth with an air of terrible detachment. "Am not going to do anything to Emily." "Mrs. Dutton, be a good sport," implored Perry coaxingly. "It's all my fault, honest. Emily wasn't one bit to blame. You see, it was this way." But Perry was too late. "I have asked my niece for an explanation, and she has refused to give it. I do not choose to listen to yours." "But," persisted Perry. "You had better go, Perry," said Emily, whose face was flying danger signals. She spoke quietly, but the Murrayest of all Murrays could not have expressed a more definite command. There was a quality in it Perry dared not disregard. He meekly scrambled out of the window into the night. Aunt Ruth stepped forward and shut the window. Then, ignoring Emily utterly, she marched her pink flannel little figure back upstairs. Emily did not sleep much that night, nor, I admit, did she deserve to. After her sudden anger died away, shame cut her like a whip. She realized that she had behaved very foolishly in refusing an explanation to Aunt Ruth. Aunt Ruth had a right to it when such a situation developed in her own house, no matter how hateful and disagreeable she made her method of demanding it. Of course, she would not have believed a word of it, but Emily, if she had given it, would not have further complicated her false position. Emily fully expected she would be sent home to New Moon in disgrace. Aunt Ruth would stonily decline to keep such a girl any longer in her house. Aunt Elizabeth would agree with her. Aunt Laura would be heartbroken. Would even Cousin Jemmy's loyalty stand the strain? It was a very bitter prospect. No wonder Emily spent a white night. She was so unhappy that every beat of her heart seemed to hurt her. And again, I say most unequivocally, she deserved it. I haven't one word of pity or excuse for her.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Allison and Caroline. Lovely, lovely reading of that comedic chapter. Please bask in the glory. Yoshiko, are you applauding or do you have a question or comment? Please speak up if so.
Hi,
So,
hi,
hi.
hi. It's in early morning in Japan. I'm I'm a little bit sleepy, and I'm very enjoying. I was very enjoying reading. Thank you. And the part of um, um Emily's is my favorite,
Yes.
and
Well,
it's very funny, and um. both of them worked very goodly, and thank you.
thank you. We are so glad you could join us all the way from Japan, Yoshiko. Thank you for your comments and for your pleasure in the reading.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I am just because that chapter has such a dire ending, I'm going to read one brief paragraph from another chapter of this same book. As we all know, Emily was driven back to New Moon with Aunt Ruth, who smiled cruelly on the way. And after lots of explanations, this paragraph occurs. "Was Perry Miller to dinner at Dr. Hardy's?" asked Aunt Elizabeth. This was another staggerer for her. The world, the Murray world, must be literally turned upside down if Stovepipe Town was invited to dinner on Queen Street. And here's one of my favorite parts. At the same moment, Aunt Ruth remembered with a pang of horror that Perry Miller had seen her in her pink flannel nightgown. It hadn't mattered before. He had been only the help boy at New Moon. Now he was Dr. Hardy's guest. So Aunt Ruth did get her comeuppance. Thank you so much to all our readers so far today. I am wondering if you would like to stop now and chat for a bit. It's 2:59, or if you would like to stick around for one more chapter that is about 10 minutes long. I'm seeing some thumbs up. So for this one, I wasn't sure if we'd have time to do it, so I didn't ask anybody to read it. If you don't mind, I will read it myself. In 1 second. And here we go. I am reading today from Anne of the Island, chapter 36, The Gardener's Call. And of course, you can all recognize why I chose this for a day of tea and company. Here is a letter with an Indian stamp for you, Aunt Jimsy, said Phil. Here are 3 or 4 from Stella and 2 for Pris, and a glorious fat one for me, from Joe. There's nothing for you, Anne, except a circular. Nobody noticed Anne's flush as she took the thin letter Phil tossed her carelessly. But a few minutes later, Phil looked up to see a transfigured Anne. Honey, what good thing has happened? The youth's friend has accepted a little sketch I sent them a fortnight ago, said Anne, trying hard to speak as if she were accustomed to having sketches accepted every mail, but not quite succeeding. Anne Shirley, how glorious! What was it? When is it to be published? Did they pay you for it? Yes, they've sent a check for $10, and the editor writes that he would like to see more of my work. Dear man, he shall. It was an old sketch I found in my box. I rewrote it and sent it in. But I never really thought it could be accepted because it had no plot, said Anne, recalling the bitter experience of Averil's Atonement. What are you going to do with that $10, Anne? Let's all go uptown and get drunk, suggested Phil. I am going to squander it in a wild, soulless revel of some kind, declared Anne gaily. At all events, it isn't tainted money, like the check I got for that horrible reliable baking powder story. I spent it usefully for clothes and hated them every time I put them on. Think of having a real live author at Patty's place, said Priscilla. It's a great responsibility, said Aunt Jamesina solemnly. Indeed it is, agreed Pris with equal solemnity. Authors are kittle cattle. You never know when or how they will break out. Anne may make copy of us. I meant that the ability to write for the press was a great responsibility, said Aunt Jamesina severely, and I hope Anne realizes it. My daughter used to write stories before she went to the foreign field, but now she has turned her attention to higher things. She used to say her motto was, never write a line you would be ashamed to read at her own funeral. You'd better take that for yours, Anne, if you are going to embark in literature. Though, to be sure, added Aunt Jamesina perplexedly, Elizabeth always used to laugh when she said it. She always laughed so much that I don't know how she ever came to decide on being a missionary. I'm thankful she did. I prayed that she might, but I wish she hadn't. Then Aunt Jamesina wondered why those giddy girls all laughed. Anne's eyes shone all that day. Literary ambitions sprouted and budded in her brain. Their exhilaration accompanied her to Jenny Cooper's walking party, and not even the sight of Gilbert and Christine walking just ahead of her and Roy could quite subdue the sparkle of her starry hopes. Nevertheless, she was not so rapt from things of the earth as to be unable to notice that Christine's walk was decidedly ungraceful. But I suppose Gilbert looks only at her face. So like a man, thought Anne scornfully. Shall you be home Saturday afternoon? Asked Roy. Yes. My mother and sisters are coming to call on you, said Roy quietly. Something went over Anne which might be described as a thrill, but it was hardly a pleasant one. She had never met any of Roy's family. She realized the significance of his statement, and it had somehow an irrevocableness about it that chilled her. "I should be glad to see them," she said flatly, and then wondered if she really would be glad. She ought to be, of course, but would it not be something of an ordeal? Gossip had filtered to Anne regarding the light in which the Gardners viewed the infatuation of son and brother. Roy must have brought pressure to bear in the matter of this call. Anne knew she would be weighed in the balance. From the fact that they had consented to call, she understood that, willingly or unwillingly, they regarded her as a possible member of their clan. "I shall just be myself. I shall not try to make a good impression," thought Anne loftily. But she was wondering what dress she would better wear on Saturday afternoon, and if the new style of high hairdressing would suit her better than the old. And the walking party was rather spoiled for her. By night, she had decided that she would wear her brown chiffon on Saturday, but would do her hair low. Friday afternoon, none of the girls had classes at Redmond. Stella took the opportunity to write a paper for the Philomathic Society and was sitting at the table in the corner of the living room with an untidy litter of notes and manuscript on the floor around her. Stella always vowed she never could write anything unless she threw each sheet down as she completed it. Anne, in her flannel blouse and serge skirt, with her hair rather blown from her windy walk home, was sitting squarely in the middle of the floor, teasing the Sarah-cat with a wishbone. Joseph and Rusty were both curled up in her lap. A warm, plummy odor filled the whole house, for Priscilla was cooking in the kitchen. Presently she came in, enshrouded in a huge work apron, with a smudge of flour on her nose, to show Aunt Jamesina the chocolate cake she had just iced. At this suspicious moment, the knocker sounded. Nobody paid any attention to it save Phil, who sprang up and opened it, expecting a boy with the hat she had bought that morning. On the doorstep stood Mrs. Gardner and her daughters. Anne scrambled to her feet somehow, emptying 2 indignant cats out of her lap as she did so, and mechanically shifting her wishbone from her right hand to her left. Priscilla, who would have had to cross the room to reach the kitchen door, lost her head, wildly plunged the chocolate cake under a cushion on the Inglenook sofa, and dashed upstairs. Stella began feverishly gathering up her manuscript. Only Aunt Jamesina and Phil remained normal. Thanks to them, everybody was soon sitting at ease, even Anne. Priscilla came down apronless and smudgeless. Stella reduced her corner to decency, and Phil saved the situation by a stream of ready small talk. Mrs. Gardner was tall and thin and handsome, exquisitely gowned, cordial with a cordiality that seemed a trifle forced. Aileen Gardner was a younger edition of her mother, lacking the cordiality. She endeavored to be nice, but succeeded only in being haughty and patronizing. Dorothy Gardner was slim and jolly and rather tomboyish. Anne knew she was Roy's favorite sister and warmed to her. She would have looked very much like Roy if she had had dreamy dark eyes instead of roguish hazel ones. Thanks to her and Phil, the call really went off very well, except for a slight sense of strain in the atmosphere and 2 rather untoward incidents. Rusty and Joseph, left to themselves, began a game of chase and sprang madly into Mrs. Gardner's silken lap and out of it in their wild career. Mrs. Gardner lifted her lorgnette and gazed after their flying forms as if she had never seen cats before, and Anne, choking back slightly nervous laughter, apologized as best she could. "You are fond of cats?" said Mrs. Gardner with a slight intonation of tolerant wonder. Anne, despite her affection for Rusty, was not especially fond of cats, but Mrs. Gardner's tone annoyed her. Inconsequently, she remembered that Mrs. John Blythe was so fond of cats that she kept as many as her husband would allow. "They are adorable animals, aren't they?" she asked wickedly. "I have never liked cats," said Mrs. Gardner remotely. "I love them," said Dorothy. "They are so nice and selfish. Dogs are too good and unselfish. They make me feel uncomfortable, but cats are gloriously human." "You have two delightful old china dogs there. May I look at them closely?" said Aileen, crossing the room towards the fireplace and thereby becoming the unconscious cause of the other accident. Picking up Magog, she sat down on the cushion under which was secreted Priscilla's chocolate cake. Priscilla and Anne exchanged agonized glances, but could do nothing. The stately Aileen continued to sit on the cushion and discuss china dogs until the time of departure. Dorothy lingered behind a moment to squeeze Anne's hand and whisper impulsively, "I know you and I are going to be chums. Oh, Roy has told me all about you. I'm the only one of the family he tells things to, poor boy. Nobody could confide in Mama and Aileen, you know. What glorious times you girls must have here. Won't you let me come often and have a share in them?" "Come as often as you like," Anne responded heartily, thankful that one of Roy's sisters was likable. She would never like Aileen, so much was certain, and Aileen would never like her, though Mrs. Gardner might be one. Altogether, Anne sighed with relief when the ordeal was over. "Of all sad words of tongue or pen, the saddest are 'it might have been,'" quoted Priscilla, tragically lifting the cushion. "This cake is now what you might call a flat failure, and the cushion is likewise ruined. Never tell me that Friday isn't unlucky. People who send word they are coming on Saturday shouldn't come on Friday," said Aunt Jamesina. "I fancy it was Roy's mistake," said Phil. "That boy isn't really responsible for what he says when he talks to Anne. Where is Anne?" Anne had gone upstairs. She felt oddly like crying, but she made herself laugh instead. Rusty and Joseph had been too awful, and Dorothy was a dear. And that is the end of the chapter. Should anyone feel like making chocolate cake, today might be the perfect day to do it. That concludes our chapter readings for today. I would like to thank Mary-Ev and Sarah, Allison, and Caroline for those wonderful readings. It was so great to hear you. Once again, thank you all. At this point, we open the chat. Well, we open the room so that people can chat. We do have one show and tell item today. Mary-Ev, would you like to show everyone and tell us about what you found, please?
Yes, thank you. I've been freezing up, so I've been signing in, and thank goodness I didn't do that too badly while I was reading. But I like going to thrift stores, and yesterday I found this. I don't know if you can see it, but says Prince Edward Island lady slippers, and it's a salt and pepper shaker. It's not, but it really reminded me of being in PEI. My first conference where I met Mary Beth and Ben and a whole bunch of other people. I don't know, we were invited out to a friend's place in Belfast, and they had a farm, and her husband, it was Catherine and Michael Edward, and sadly they're both gone now, but that was my first time meeting them, and they took us on a wagon ride back in the woods, and a kindred friend, Betsy, and her friend Molly, they were so excited to see lady slippers growing wild back in the woods. Molly in particular was so excited to see them, and that they were real and just growing so naturally. So when I see the lady slipper on here, it reminded me of that day. And we also went back after the wagon ride. Everybody sat on the porch or outside, and they made homemade ice cream with the churn and all that. And Kevin McCabe and John Ferns that did the poetry book, they were there. And a lot of people took turns making this homemade ice cream. So and the picture of that wagon ride is in the Ellen Montgomery album, and it is the worst ever picture of me. It was before I went to Weight Watchers, and it is an absolute awful picture, but it's a lovely memory. So look it up in the Ellen Montgomery album. So that's what the Salt and Pepper Shakers reminded me of and brought back that happy memory. So I hope that was a not too long of a show and tell. So
That was great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mary Ev. What a find and what a lovely story. I was fortunate enough to be invited to the Hamilton chapter last year, actually. And Yuka and I went along. Mary Ev served us a lovely lunch. The inspiration for this series of readings, by the way, came from the Hamilton chapter because every month they read a chapter out loud. And it was so good to listen to and to participate that I thought it might be fun during the winter months to do it again. Thank you all for coming today. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
See you in
Bye. Thank
February.
you.
See you in February.